All right, we're in Job 10. When Ryan said, I hope you're not in 38, I thought people were praying for us to be in 38, but no, not yet. Not yet. Job chapter 10, this continues his response. This is the first round of speeches and his response to Bildad. And then the next chapter we'll look at Zophar, who is the third of the friends, of course, who will speak, and Job will respond to him. And there are two more rounds of speeches after that, but they kind of get a little bit swifter because they kind of run out of things to say, or they've heard and said everything that they can say. All right, so in chapter 9, you remember 9 and 10 are Job's response. In 9, Job has been he's used a lot of legal terminology to try and get a court hearing with God, so to speak, about what it is that he has done wrong. He has since, as he goes through that, given up the notion that, that's going to work. That's not going to produce anything. And that's another thing which we're not doing because it would take even more time to do. But in every chapter where Job is speaking, you can chart where he is emotionally. Okay? He's down here, and then he makes it, and he surges really high, and then he starts trickling down, and then the bottom falls out, and he's back down to where he started. And so, tracing his emotional roller coaster up and down throughout the chapter is a way you can look at every chapter, and I think it's profitable. I just don't think you want to be in Job for 3 years. So, anyway, that's what we're looking at. And so in 9 and 10, where these two chapters are together, he started out hoping he could stand before God, and then he says, well, that's not going to work, and the bottom falls out on him. And so now that he's back at the bottom, he begins a lament. Okay, a lament. Now, laments, a great portion of the Psalms are laments. And the ironic thing about our culture is this. Well, look, I don't want anybody to feel sorry for me, but at the same time, I want everybody to feel sorry for me. You understand that? I don't want anybody to feel sorry for me, but I do want everybody to feel sorry for me. That is the way that a great portion of our culture thinks. And so there is a point, and I don't always know what that line is, there is a point where a lament, a legitimate complaint turns into self-pity, and we have to be cautious of what that line is. But the answer is not saying that I don't ever have the right to lament the situation that I'm in. Because the bottom line is the situation is just flat out hard. And God doesn't expect you the fact that the largest section of the Psalms deals with people lamenting. We have an entire book of the Bible called Lamentations, where people are struggling. And they're not being crybabies. They've experienced really difficult, dark things. And God doesn't expect us to say, just buck up and put a smile on. Job said, if I did that, what would be the point? And he's already said that in chapter 9. And so in chapter 10, he's comfortable exploring how he feels and working through it and expressing those things. And a lot of people have in mind when we talk about expressing emotions, especially for a lot of men, we're kind of allergic to that idea. And we kind of have the idea of expressing emotions means I'm going to sit down in an office with a therapist and we're going to work through all of my problems. Well, that's not exactly how a lot of therapy works, actually, especially those who know what they're doing. We don't spend all of our time diving into the past. That won't help you necessarily in the present. But anyway, we kind of have that notion where that's what this is. Listen, I have processed my emotions about and thoughts about certain things while I'm on the lawnmower mowing the yard. All you're doing is just simply thinking through the situation. That's it. Allowing yourself to be frustrated, to be agitated by something that's going on, and just kind of working your way through it. And by the time you're done, you kind of got it off of your chest, so to speak. You kind of got it out of your head from spinning around, and then you're ready to move on. And so sometimes when we look at and we study things like Job and Psalms, a lot of American Christians are very uncomfortable with it because we're uncomfortable with the idea of complaining. And that comes from a lot of people saying, like Philippians 2, do all things without murmuring and complaining. Okay, but what is he talking about in the context? Is God saying that all complaining is sinful? I mean, I don't see that. I see him speaking to one specific church about a specific situation at hand. There is a difference between complaining that assaults God, the way the children of Israel did in the wilderness and left him behind and turned to other gods, and a complaining that says, I love you with my whole heart and I don't understand what is happening. Help me think through it. That kind of complaining is not only acceptable, it's encouraged in Scripture to think through them that way. So, with Job then, he will begin that process. Somebody read for us, if you don't mind, verses 1 through 7. Job 10, 1 through 7. Okay, so he begins by summarizing and reaffirming these things. In verse 1, you see three different terms that describe his current state. He loathes, he complains, and he's in bitterness. I loathe my life. I will give free utterance to my complaint. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. Okay, so for what has happened to him now, going back to what we were saying a moment ago about complaints and keeping them in perspective. So, I mean, it's no secret I'm an Ole Miss guy through and through. I bleed it, okay? Our head football coach has been one of the most controversial figures in college football for a long time. But for a great portion of time, for the last few years since he's been at Ole Miss, he's begun to reform his life, okay? And so a couple of interviews recently were released, and listening to what he says in those interviews where he basically talks religion but doesn't talk religion. He talks about how his job became his God and he lived and died by the approval of his God. But he tells a story in there about how because he saw so much success as a young man, and then when he was the offensive coordinator at USC, they were playing for their third straight national championship against Texas. They ended up losing. Vince Young scored a game-winning touchdown at the end, but USC had their chance. They ran a play that had worked all season. It worked 3 times in that game. They missed a block. It did not work. They ended up losing. So he's young. He's got one child at the time, and he looks at his wife after it's over, and they're driving home, and he says, I don't want to wake up tomorrow. I don't want to wake up tomorrow. To which she responds, what do you mean? You are married? You have a child? You have all these different things that are going for you. And he's like, but it's never happened. The 3 in a row, like, you know how long it would take to ever even get back to that place? And the point he was telling the story was not to say that's how you should think. The point in telling the story was just how out of perspective he was. He lost a game. There's a difference between saying, I loathe my life and I don't want to wake up in the morning because we didn't win the game. That's complaining. That's pity partying. When Job says, I loathe my life, Job's got legitimate reasons to complain. Do you see the difference? So, he does have a complaint, and he is bitter. And as we've been throughout this, I don't know how anybody could ever... Look, even people who have, in my judgment, become bitter in general, even though I may not agree with the fact that they are just bitter people, with a lot of them I can understand why they are the way they are. They've endured a lot. And I don't know that if I had endured the same thing that I would be any different. So, in that bitterness, he begins his lament. I will say to God, do not condemn me. Let me know why you contend against me. And so he begins by addressing God, saying, again, the same thing he's been saying, what have I done wrong? What do you have against me? And then he says, does it seem good to you to oppress, to despise the work of your hands, and to favor the designs of the wicked? So, does it seem good to you to oppress? The idea behind oppression carries with it social injustices that often lead to violence and mistreatment of other people. And so, do you oppress and despise the work of your hands? Human beings, and he will go into this much more a little bit later, human beings, we are the work of God's hands. He literally formed Adam from the ground. Now, what he's saying is, does it make sense that you would mistreat something that you so intricately created? It's kind of like when you're growing up and you're a kid and you do crazy stuff in the house, like, I don't know, and I'm not saying this because my kids have done it, but you take a pencil and you just start stabbing the sheetrock on the wall as you walk down the hallway. When I'm a kid, if I take a pencil and I stab sheetrock down the hallway, I don't think anything about it. But when you're an adult, and you have worked and scrimped and saved and done all this to have this, and somebody starts poking holes in your sheetrock, it hits a little different. It belongs to you. Maybe even when you remodel the home, you have an investment in that. And at a much larger scale, that's what Job is saying about God. Look, you have an investment in me. I mean, you made me. You formed me. Does it make sense that you would destroy what you've created? And then he says, and not only do that, but that you would favor the designs of the wicked. Now, Job, he's upset. He's not thinking he's working through thoughts. And that's the thing about working through thoughts. You have a lot of thoughts, and thoughts are simply thoughts. That doesn't make them right. Okay? And that's true at a number of levels. So, when I know this is, if you're not already asleep, this one will put you there. So I'm sitting down to write a sermon, and I've got a subject in mind, a subject that's been assigned. And so the first thing I do with a blank sheet of paper is just empty my head of thoughts about it. Whatever is up here, just throw it up on paper. Now, in the process of studying, one of the things you're going to see is you go back and you look at that piece of paper. Whoops, scratch that. That was dumb. That wasn't even close to right. But it doesn't make you dumb because you had the thought. It just means these are thoughts that I had, and I'm working through to see if the thoughts stand up to the test of scrutiny. And so what Job is doing, while he's saying things that they're not right, but that's part of processing. You deal with things, you say things that even in frustration are not right. But again, that's all part of the process. So he kind of sees it in his mind, and this is similar. You can read a longer discussion of this in Psalm 73 when Asaph talks about the perceived injustice when he says, look, I try and serve God, and everything in my life is difficult. Basically, I've got to try and scrape my pennies together just to survive and eke out an existence. And these other people over here who care nothing about God, they've got more money than their heart could hope. Their health is perfect. Everything happens for them. Everything is good for them, and my life is difficult. And I don't think that's fair. So, he says to God that you would destroy me and favor the designs of the wicked. Have you eyes of flesh? Do you see as man sees? The eyes of flesh, and remember we're dealing with poetry. The idea is, well, he's saying the same thing twice. This is classic poetry, parallelism. In essence, what he's saying is, God, the way you're treating me is like you don't know me completely. Okay? Like you don't know me completely. Because you're omniscient. You know everything. You know I'm righteous. Okay? So, God, you know I'm righteous, and because of that, you should make righteous judgments. But the way you're treating me seems to be unrighteous. And it seems to me that you're looking at me like one human would look at another. Now, as a human being, if I look at another human being and make a judgment, and no, that's not the type of judgment that's condemned in Matthew 7. We make judgments every single day. But we make judgments based upon what we can see, what we hear, what we learn about people. We have to make judgment calls. But what is one thing that we have to be willing to admit when we make judgments about people? There's probably something I don't know. Okay? Because I'm not omniscient. I don't know the whole story. I don't know everything that has led a person to this point to be this way, to behave this way, to believe this way. And so my judgments, even though they may be sincere, can be wrong. But God does have perfect knowledge. When He looks at an individual, He can see them in their completeness. He does not misunderstand anything or anyone or any situation. And so when Job says you're seeing as man sees, what he's saying is your judgments don't line up with what you know. The way you're treating me does not line up with what you know. And so you're acting like a man. That is, you're acting almost beneath yourself. He says this in verse 5, Are your days as the days of a man, or your years as a man's years? That you seek out my iniquity and search for my sin, although you know I'm not guilty, and there is none to deliver out of your hand? And so, first of all, when he says, are your years as man's years? This has to do with the fact, God, you're eternal. Like, you're not going anywhere. Human beings, we're a small blip on the radar of time. God exists outside of it. He's not going anywhere. Okay? So as human beings, if we want to get things accomplished, sometimes we have this sense of urgency and rush because we want to get things accomplished. And so what he's saying about God is, the way you have treated me is almost as if you're acting like you're just a human being, like you only have one life, and that the goal of your life is to inflict as much pain on me as possible. Now again, if you go back and look at it, read chapter 1 again. How quickly does it all come crashing down on his head? You can see where he's coming from, right? Look at all the things that you have poured on me. It's like you're a man and you think you're dying, and you've got to get in every punch you can get in before you die. That's how he sees, and that's how he feels about God and what is going on here. He said, you're searching, and it's like you have made it your life's mission to find something wrong with me. But you know I'm not guilty. But here's the thing. You're all powerful. So if you decide to do that, who's going to help me? Who can deliver me from your hand? Nobody. So he is saying God is looking at him on a time scale and then looking at him with a nitpicking mentality. Which is also how his friends look at him. I'll just put it this way. Whatever you look for in someone, you will find it. Whatever you look for in someone, you will find it. If you look for flaws, you will find them. If you look for a reason, because flaws in your mind give you the right to discredit someone, if you want to nitpick, you can nitpick. Okay? And it doesn't even have to be actions. We can just start with words you said 10 minutes before you came into this building. If somebody gave me a transcript of every word that all of us said, the 10 minutes leading up to before services started, we could spend days nitpicking the words of every single person. I could tell you, you could tell me every word that was offensive, every phrase that was offensive, everything that was offensive, everything that was thoughtless, everything that was... Because if that's what you want to find, you can find it. But you know, the opposite is also true. You want to find good in people? If you look for it, it's what you'll find. And so, although Job is wrong about his understanding of that's what God is doing to him, it is what we sometimes do to each other. And that is we nitpick. So, now Job is going to expand upon this idea of God creating him and how it doesn't make any sense to kill your creation. Listen, he's got about 5 different metaphors or similes that he uses. He says, your hands fashioned and made me, and now you have destroyed me altogether. God, you built me up, and that's kind of the point. You see, this whole discussion has been about Satan saying, Job is only serving you because you give him a bunch of stuff. And Job is saying, that's not why. That has nothing to do with why I've served God. But Job does rightly credit everything that he ever had came from God. God, you made me. I never once made the claim I made myself. You made me. I know that I was industrious, and I knew that I was business savvy, and that I did the things that I should have done, and that helped me become successful, but you made me successful ultimately. I never claimed ownership of those things. You made me, but now you're destroying me. You're dismantling me. That doesn't make sense. Then he says in verse 9, remember that you have made me like clay, and will you return me to the dust? Clay, fragility. And obviously returning to the dust is the idea of death. And that was not just a common belief in Hebrew culture. There's a lot of Mesopotamian myths that are still, we have preserved some of those documents, and if you read them, one of the things that you will commonly see is reference to man being mud or clay or dust. And so he's fragile, but you've made me. Why are you returning me to dust? He says, did you not pour me out like milk and curdle me like cheese? Okay? Going through the process of producing that, right? Taking the milk and then letting it curdle and things along those lines. You made me that way. He's just stacking up images. You clothed me with skin and flesh and knit me together with bones and sinews. You granted me life and steadfast love, and your care has preserved my spirit. You created me. These images of verses 8 through 11 are 4 images of him creating, and then he says, and you have preserved my life. You have been faithful to me, and you have cared for me all this time. Yet, verse 13, these things you hid in your heart. I know this was your purpose. If I sin, you watch me and do not acquit me of my iniquity. If I am guilty, woe to me. If I am in the right, I cannot lift up my head, for I am filled with disgrace and look upon my affliction. In essence, what he's saying is this. You created me, and this is his perception of the situation as he finds it currently. You created me, and you were extremely good to me. But from where I'm sitting with how things have turned out, it looks like you were good to me just so you could torture me more. Now I want you to think about, now obviously, again, we know the full picture. Job does not. It has nothing to do with what is happening. But I want you to see the tenacity of faith. Job thinks that God is doing all of this to him. He thinks that God, in his grief, he thinks that God has been good to him so that he might hurt him all the more. And he still refuses to leave God. In chapter 13, he's going to say, if he kills me, I'm still going to trust him. Just because I can't, and that's the big thing about Job. Job, as far as we know, is never told why all this happens to him. We have no record of that. Unless Job wrote the book, which is possible, Job never finds out why he went through everything he went through. No one tells him. But he refused to quit on God. And I don't know about you, but for me, that's important. Because I don't wake up feeling like a rainbow every day. Matter of fact, rarely does that ever happen. Honestly, if I wake up and I feel like I don't have a lot of things to do and a lot of places to be and different things and meetings I need to be in and calls and things that need to be done, I actually kind of get scared. Because it's so strange. That's the part about, and the reason why I emphasize that over and over again is because as a kid, that was the part of faith nobody would tell me. Everybody gave me the view that it's always going to be smooth sailing. That's what everybody tried to tell me. And so you can imagine the difficulty I had when life didn't treat me that way, and I was trying to figure out what in the world was wrong with me, why my faith was insufficient, because it wasn't what they said it was. Well, then I did this really dumb thing, and I said, you know what, I'm going to forget what people have told me, and I'm just going to read it for myself. I'm just going to read it for myself. And I'm going to ask myself, what does faith look like? People who were called individuals of faith, what did their lives look like? And from everything I can tell, rarely were they ever easy, and rarely was it smooth sailing, and rarely did they ever soar to the heights of heaven. They struggled and they sludged it out every single day. Because that's what faith is. It's commitment to every single moment, especially in moments where I can't understand. So Job is staying true to that. Now look, he says in verse 15, if I'm guilty, woe to me. If I'm in the right, I can't lift up my head. And that's a statement that refers back to chapter 9. He feels like he's in a no-win situation. For I am filled with disgrace. Look upon my affliction. God, at least be merciful. Look at it. That reminds me actually of a statement. So in the congregational study plan, we're in Judges-ish. I'm not going by the study plan book. I don't know exactly where it is. But there was a statement in the Judges that struck me recently, and I'll read it in just a moment. But what Job is saying is, can't you look at me and just have some pity? Now, think about what is said in Judges. It's my other Bible, so this is my Bible I can actually read in public. The Ammonites are oppressing the people of Israel. And that's what I read today, wasn't it? And they seek God's help for the oppression. Okay? They end up seeking God's help in the midst of the oppression. And basically, I can't remember exactly where it is. It's in the early part of Judges. They're seeking God's help, and God says, no, I'm not going to help you. You wanted your idols. Cry out to them and let them save you. And then the text says, and they put away their idols and they sought the Lord. And then there's this beautiful statement that's made. But the Lord was impatient with their misery. When he saw them hurting, he just couldn't take it. He was impatient with their misery, and he ends up delivering them. Job is in a situation where he hasn't sinned or done anything wrong, and he's asking God, in essence, to be impatient with his misery. Get him some relief. Judges 11. Okay. So it says back in Job 10 and verse 16, and were my head lifted up, you would hunt me like a lion and again work wonders against me. You renew your witnesses against me and increase your vexation toward me. You bring fresh troops against me. That is, okay, even if you gave me a break and you acquitted me, you'd just find something else and this process would start all over again. That's basically what he's saying. If I could argue the case, if I could be acquitted on one front, okay, case dismissed on that charge, you'd just have another list of charges and all this process would start all over again. So he goes back to similar language in his first lament in chapter 3. Why did you bring me out of the womb? Would that I had died before any eye had seen me. And were as though I had not been born, were as though I had not been carried from the womb to the grave, stillborn. Like I said, I have I know there are people who have. Obviously, we're reading about one. But I have never, and some of the people in this room probably have, but I have never known hurt to the level where I wish that I'd never existed. I've never known that level of hurt. I believe that it exists, and I believe that people feel it. But that tells you something about the depth of his hurt. And so he continues to ask God to just let him go. He says, verse 20, are not my days few? Then cease and leave me alone that I may find a little cheer. Like he says in chapter 7 and verse 19. Look, just let me swallow my spit one time. Just give me that small increment of time where I don't hurt. Just give me a break. He says, verse 21, before I go, and I shall not return. To the land of darkness and deep shadow, the land of gloom like thick darkness, like deep shadow without any order, where light is as thick as darkness. Job has given up all hope that he's ever going to recover. Job is a walking dead man in his own eyes. And to be fair, if you saw him in his physical stature, that's probably a fair assessment. But he's asking God, look at the way they thought of death: darkness, deep shadow, gloom, thick darkness, deep shadow, thick darkness. The idea of, look, just by empirical senses, when you lowered a person or when you deposited them in the tomb, I mean, it's dark. There's no light there. So that's how he sees. And so he's just asking God to give him some relief because he knows he's dying. And I just want to have a good day or two before I die. And so that's where we leave him. And then his next genius friend will. Now again, you got a person who said, I'm dying and I know it and it hurts. And his genius friend wants to correct him. It's a good call. All right. Job 11, hopefully next time.